And so I started to Google, Terry Wrist. The only hit that I would get for that name came from a really weird, obscure book about using magic rituals to summon extraterrestrials. And it was by a guy by the name of Alan Greenfield. He was an occultist and also UFO investigator. It was from 1994. It's called Secret Cipher of the Ufonauts. And nothing in the book mentions Terry Wrist until the appendix in the back of the book, because there's like a 3 or 4 page interview with this guy who goes by the pseudonym Terry R. Wrist. And it was all about this guy who claimed that him and a bunch of other Vietnam veterans, they went around to different underground bases where there were extraterrestrials had set up shop, and they would go in there and basically clean them out. So they were kind of like a real alien cave-based task force. But again, as crazy as that sounded, this whole book, The Secret Cipher of the Ufonauts, was presented as complete fact. And it was all about using occult rituals to contact extraterrestrials. And it just seems strange that this whole thing about these crazy, fantastical cave explorations by ass-kicking alien cave-based task force Vietnam vets would be in there if it wasn't relevant somehow. And that was the only reference to a Terry Wrist I could find, and it was from 1994.
So at this point, we had started working on another project.
We were doing a little web series, and we went out to Brown Mountain, North Carolina.
Part of the project was, these experiments, asking these big questions like, can you get abducted by aliens? So, we went to a place that technically we should have been able to be abducted by aliens.
So we went to Brown Mountain, didn't get abducted by aliens. But a friend of ours, Mike Hanks, said, hey, while you're out here, there's something really cool that I think I should show you guys. A psychic told me that there's an entrance to an underground base where aliens have set up shop. And we're immediately like, oh God, this reminds us of the Goblins. We got to go check this thing out. Now, you've heard stories, clearly, that there are underground bases somewhere here in these mountains.
Yeah, as a matter of fact, one of the popular legends is that there's one, mostly associated with the Brown Mountain area, which is, is just kind of back up behind us. We're on Table Rock right now, but a lot of the stories are that there are indeed rumblings and happenings right here under Table Rock where we are right now. One of the best stories that I heard years and years ago was from a man who was a UFO investigator here in the region who had said that he had been contacted by people who had kept talking about the military presence at Brown Mountain and in the Linville Gorge. And furthermore, that a psychic had told him that there was an entrance to a base right under this mountain. And so I kind of, took that with a grain of salt. But in truth, with all the cave openings and entrances, like the one that I just brought you through to get to this majestic vantage here on Table Rock, in my opinion, if there was any place that you want to hide something like that, this would be ideal for it, wouldn't it?
So he led us on this crazy path that went down around the side of the mountain. And then just as the psychic had predicted, there were these 2 big pillars. And then between the pillars was the entrance to this cave.
We're now at the entrance of the cave here. But I know that there are people who are convinced that the Brown Mountain lights emanate from a ufological kind of phenomenon of some sort. And then, of course, that there is a base under Table Rock. So for all we know, we're entering the lower extremities of that base right now.
And it went in a fair amount, but once we got in there, you could see that there was this big rock slab that it almost looked like it just been placed there.
And it looked weird enough for you to go like, that shouldn't be there. That didn't just like fall off that mountain, perfectly slide into this hole that is a cave. Like a couple of us had tried to actually get into it, and you could see kind of through it. It wasn't like a perfect square, like a door, but it was enough that like the shape of it was strange.
Look at that. That looks like that was placed there, doesn't it?
That's what I said. That rock is just out of juice. surreal. Alright, all jokes about feeling take bases aside. Go watch, I'm gonna turn to some rock and then a panel's gonna open the stairway to an alien world,
What do you guys think?
This is amazing.
Do you think that this is the entrance to an alien cave?
Do you know what? If there was an entrance,
Yeah, man.
here, grab this big guy.
Your mind will let you so man.
You'd have to, I wonder if you'd have to climb up that rock right there on the top, because there's definitely an opening big enough for a body up there. Is there all? Well, it looks like
Terry Riss talked about 3 different entrances into these cave bases, and one of them was on Brown Mountain in North Carolina. We could have been standing in that entrance right then, but we couldn't get any further, so there was nothing much we could do.
And so again, it's kind of like that idea of like trusting and just going with it, because it might sound absurd, but at the end of the day, we were all standing in front of a cave that looked like the entrance to what could have been an underground base, and there was a big, huge, giant slab of rock there stopping us from being able to get inside.
It wasn't too long after we returned from all these trips that we got an email from a guy who was going by the name Terry Riss. And it said, "Why did you stop when you were so close? I have something for you." It was like weird and misspelled. This really strange kind of cadence to it. At that point, I'm like, okay, somebody's fine. At this point, it was all lowercase. Like everything was strange about it. Whether or not this is involved in the original emails from David or not, somebody's messing with me, because a lot of the information about the goblins that we had at this point was on the internet, because we'd written a little post about it. Sure enough, a week later, another email comes in. This one read, "Hellier was just a symptom. The ink and the black are isolated still, and third order MIA. Bear in mind, for every door closed, a window must be opened. The door is closed, the window is open. Use the numbers." Right off the bat, this one struck us, because he specifically mentions Hellier. But in all of our postings, we never once released the name of Davidstown. So there's no way he should have known that. And the attachment was a photograph. And it was a photograph of paper that had a whole mess of numbers on it. And the numbers, there were 16 numbers. And as with everything else, put it on Facebook. I said, "What the heck is this?" One of my friends immediately pointed out, "Oh, that's a credit card number." And I thought, oh geez, so I should pull it down, because who knows, whose credit card number this was. That's what somebody else pointed out. No, those are GPS coordinates. And at that point, I had this cold chill run down my spine, because when I put them into a GPS, they actually pointed right to where this cave was, or at least the similar vicinity of this cave in North Carolina that Micah Hanks had taken us to.
I mean, there's literally only 1 or 2 people who should have known the exact spot where we were. That's weird. And that freaked me out.
Whoever it was knew we were there at this cave. Very few people knew where we were going or what we were doing. As far as I know, only Micah really knew where this cave was.
It was actually really frightening, because we both kind of looked at each other like, what is actually going on? It kind of made a lot of the other stuff seem more concrete, which kind of in retrospect, for me specifically, was a bit upsetting.
The only thing that this was similar to that I could find was letters that were sent to John Keel. Most people know John Keel because he wrote the Mothman Prophecies. He was the guy who popularized the Mothman sightings. There was a lot of really weird high strangeness that happened around that, a lot of really strange coincidences, and he was the guy who kind of made that what it is. But he had a lot of really interesting theories that I'm really into, which are that there are window areas, and in these window areas, things can come in and out a little more easily, like the veil is thinner. UFOs aren't coming from outer space, they're coming from here, from another dimension, as are most of the creatures that we run into in cryptozoology. extraterrestrials, that kind of stuff. He used to get letters from these people who called themselves the International Bankers, and they came from weird postmark places in other countries. Sometimes they didn't even have a postmark on them; they were just like sent through the mail without any postmarking. Sometimes they just showed up in his mailbox, but they were the same kind of weird misspellings, almost purposeful misspellings of things. But they were super direct in, you need to stop doing what you're doing. You need to stop doing that to what you're doing too. But it was weird because this read differently. It said, why did you stop? Not stop. Why did you stop? Here's GPS coordinates. Go find the window. The door's closed. Go find the window. We continued to kind of look around and look into this type of stuff, and occasionally, something would pop up or someone would say, oh, the story that you guys shared, something like this happened to my grandfather, and he called them the gobsows. Or my grandparents used to tell me about the holler goblins in eastern Kentucky. So little things kept popping up here and there, but no matter what we would do, we never heard back from Terry Wrist. We never heard back from David. Really interesting thing happened about a year and a half ago. We got into contact with Geraldine Sutton Stith, who is one of the last relatives of the Sutton family who lived in the farmhouse. Her father was Lucky, who actually shot at one of these goblins. There's 2 living relatives of hers that were present for the case, but they refused to talk about it. She says they were just made fun of way too much in the media. So Geraldine's kind of taken it upon herself to keep sharing stories about this and keep that story alive. And I just, there was all this stuff with caves and the goblins that kept coming up. Monsters in like the Appalachians. They would come out of caves. People were meeting strange little creatures in caves. Turns out the Mammoth Cave system sits right below Kentucky, the center of Kentucky. It runs almost the stretch from Hopkinsville all the way over to Hellier, and then all the way up through the Appalachians. And, there could be a way that this is all connected. So I asked Geraldine, I said, this is a weird question. Do you remember at the farmhouse, where the stuff crashed and where all these sightings took place? Were there caves nearby the farmhouse? Was the farmhouse still there? Could I come out and see it? The farmhouse was long gone. The property was owned by somebody else. She wasn't sure that there were any caves, but she was really good friends with people from town, and she said she'd ask. A day or 2 later, she got back and she goes, what's really interesting? There's a big cave right next to where this thing crashed. The cave system runs all the way through there and connects to the Mammoth Cave system. And I was like, holy cow, this is all connected. But as we continue to plot these out, we start to notice that there's a theme that occurs. And it's not just goblin stuff. It's very similar stuff. And it pops up all through the Mammoth Cave system, all the way up through the Appalachians, even up, as far as like Vermont. There are all of these stories about people seeing these things in and around caves. A lot of them have 3 footprints. A lot of them look kind of like the same type of deal. Some of them they generally kind of look like a variation of like an extraterrestrial creature. But they've all given them different names because regionally they never heard of the Hopkinsville stuff. So some of them call them Tommyknockers, or in the mines, and get disturbed when there's big loud sounds and it sounds like dudes are mining. So we started thinking, what if it was never extraterrestrials to begin with? What if it was something that was in these caves and dwelled in these caves? They all fit, like the whole thing fits. The map is there. You can look at the map. You can see these black spots that just fit this whole trail. And so, from the 50s on, there have been all of these sightings, and all of these people are giving them different names. They don't think that they're related because they don't have an option. They don't know that this stuff's going on. The other thing that led us to believe that there's even more credibility to this theory was a production company that wanted to shoot this project with us about the goblins. It was like a one-off thing. It was never supposed to be made for public consumption. It was just to sell the show. It was a sizzle reel. And they found us stuff we'd written about the goblins. I thought, well, this is perfect. This is just weird, this is interesting. We've never seen it before. And they said, would you guys be interested in being part of the sizzle reel? It's just for internal use. No one's going to see it. Obviously, we don't need to go out to the actual town. Like, we'll meet in the middle, because this guy was from Tennessee. And we were like, yeah, we'll get a free adventure out of it. It's like a weekend. They'll feed us and put us up. And so we went down Cave City, Kentucky, kind of in the middle of Kentucky, middle of the Mammoth Cave system. It's one of those places where there's lots of like recreational caves that have like been roadside traps since the 50s and the 60s. We got the big dinosaurs and stuff.
Every explorer needs to
Stuff like that everywhere. They're all tearing down the cameras and everything afterwards. And there had been this little girl who was riding her bike back and forth, kind of seeing all the people with the cameras, wondering what was going on. And she ended up walking over to Dana and I, just kind of sitting there killing time while everybody's breaking down. And she said, that man over there says that you two are monster hunters.
You guys look for monsters. And she was psyched and like really excited.
I said, yeah. Why, have you seen any monsters? And she said, yeah. My friends and I, we see them all the time. My parents see monsters too. So, are they scary? Are they under your bed? That kind of thing. And she's like, no, they come out of the caves. And I started to look around immediately, and I was like, okay, which producer, put her up to this? Because this is a fun story twist. Like, okay, which of the producers did this? No one's paying any attention. They're all just tearing down their equipment. We're not even wearing lav mics at this point. So there's no audio, there's nothing.
We were like, well, can you draw? Can you draw what they look like?
And so I scrambled and found a piece of paper and got a pen from the dude behind the counter.
And she started off by drawing their feet, which was a random detail that initially I thought, okay, now I was 100% sure that a producer put her up to it, because the first thing she drew was just little 3-toed footprint. And kids drawing feet, they don't just randomly just draw 3. And it's even kind of the same shape, it's an elongated kind of slender in the middle footprint with 3 bulbs on the top.
I mean, it looks like a kid's drawing, but it still fits what these goblin prints look like. I'm freaking out, and at this point, I'm telling everyone, I'm like, turn the cameras on, turn them on, bring them over here. Mics or not, turn them on, and watch this. And she started talking about how her parents were like, oh yeah, they tell us not to go near the mines, and it's coming from this one over here. It was 2 streets away. And I said, can you draw what one of these things looks like? And she drew, looks like a kid's version of a Kentucky goblin.
There are 2 completely fascinating points on it that she should not have drawn, for any other reason other than she had legitimately seen these things. Often, the Hopkinsville goblins, they're often described as having glassy, large eyes, very large, glassy eyes, and very kind of weird elephant-shaped ears that kind of protrude from the sides of their heads. And she nailed it. She drew both of those things. She basically drew an alien face with those 2 attributes. And we were like, there's no way a kid would just randomly, number one, draw a 3-toed footprint, but draw the face of the Hopkinsville goblins. There's no reason on the planet for that.
And at this point, I freaked out. The fact alone that this little girl, not knowing anything about the Hopkinsville caves, not knowing anything other than we were monster hunters, was able to draw not only a 3-toed footprint, but the head of a creature that looks exactly like the Kentucky goblins was really strange. And it happened smack dab in the middle of the Mammoth Cave system.
The weight of that moment for us was just again, another one of those moments where you're it aligns everything that's already happened in a weird perspective, because you have to kind of stop and go holy shit, that maybe actually really happened. You know what I mean? It's those moments of gravity that change the past and change the way that you kind of looked at stuff. And that keeps happening, those solidifying moments where you can't just go oh, it was just someone sending us a stupid email, because it really doesn't feel like it at this point.
So we thought after we moved to Cincinnati, Hellier's only about 3.5, 4 hours away from here. We'd never been there before and thought, we're not doing anything. We got a free weekend. Let's just go. Let's just go and let's ask around and see what we find. Shocked when we got to this place because you can only tell so much, like looking at a GPS map. This place was totally dead. Tiny, tiny town. There's no cell phone service there. Middle of nowhere. Clearly, it was like an old mining town. They had really one store, and it was the gas station, the grocery store, and the pizza restaurant. And we thought, well, that's as good a place as I need to start. I'm gonna go ask about the goblins. Dana sat in the car, and I put a little lapel mic on, and she kind of shot me from the car. I went in, and I just started asking people and showing them these pictures. How's it going? Not bad. Can I ask you a weird question while I'm here? You ever see anything that looks like that?
I was really nervous. And when we got there, Greg and I were looking at each other and going like, this is probably a bad idea. And we were like, we'll stop at 1 or 2 places. We'll talk to people. And it just opened like a whole can of worms.
What is it?
That's what I'm trying to find out, man. Before too long, it was not even half an hour. There were like a dozen, 2 dozen people that had showed up at this place because people were calling people and said, hey, there's something here. He's investing in this weird thing. And everybody had some kind of story.
Here's a secret. We said,
He's seen Bigfoot. He's sworn
Seen Bigfoot? What was it like?
Those do look real on
hill, ran across the road in just a couple of steps, and then put his hand on the guardrail.
No joke.
And just hopped across and was gone. Like it turned and looked at me and then just popped and gone. It was. I never said nothing about this for, I guess, years. Went on before I ever said anything. And other people was, was saying, hey, we seen something. Us,
Yeah.
And then they was describing about the same thing that I.
So you saw it ranged anywhere from little things that were running across the street to people saying, oh yeah, we get weird prints on our property all the time. I've got an old mine on my property. Everybody around here has old mines on their property. And they said, well, it's weird because a few years ago, there was this giant UFO and it hovered above the town. And they said it hovered there for hours and hours and hours. And they were like, it was as big as a jumbo jet. This thing was massive.
Like I said years ago, people think he's crazy. We seen it. You seen it. I seen it. My whole family down there seen it. We watched it. It was there all day long, right in the middle of the day. Seems like it was in October about 2 years ago.
And what's the name of the newspaper?
Appalachian News Express.
Appalachian News Express.
Yep.
Okay.
It was on the front page. Thousands of people seen it. And you could see it pretty good. It was like a cylinder shape, and it wasn't moving. It was just there.
Wow.
In the same spot. And it was there for a long time, man. All day that day.
It just hovered.
And it was like it was spinning because when it was rotating, it would catch the sun and it'd get real bright, and then as it was rotating, it'd go away.
These images, snapped by Alan Epling, have
Every explorer needs to.
the man stumped. That's saying something coming from a long-time amateur astronomer.
I know what satellite light said. I track satellites with my ham radio and the telescope.
But this object is like nothing he's ever seen. For 2.5 hours, he watched and photographed this object as it hung in the air until eventually it disappeared. And he wasn't alone. Police say they received numerous calls, and Epling found other observers online.
No one knew who David Christie was. No one had any idea. Somebody actually asked, like, oh, ask this guy. He's been living here for forever. And this super old dude was like, I've lived here my whole life, and I've never heard that name. No idea who this guy is. We thought, okay, well, let's go see if we can find David's house. The town's not big. So we drove up this road, and there's a house sitting there on the left side of this road.
There's an abandoned house, all grown up. Maybe that's Damon's house.
Oh my gosh, there's a car back there.
That could be it. But look, it's abandoned. It looks like it's been abandoned.
Exercise equipment on the.
It looks like it's been abandoned for like 3 years. There's a basketball net back there. That's where kids would be. Old fucking Christmas lights still up?
There's a shed.
There is a fucking shed there.
Yeah. There was a stream nearby. There were caves nearby, old mines, and it looked like it had been abandoned for about 2 or 3 years, which would have been the time that David was going through all this stuff. The house still had stuff all on the front lawn, but no one was living there at the time.
When we saw this specific house, it was like a weird, something just was like, this is it. Like it just, I felt like chills almost looking at it because it was just a family home that had been totally abandoned. It creepily still had like kids' toys, and it had the window that like would have been the window that they would have been looking in. And, like all of these details that like felt right, and it felt in my gut like it was the house. Like it creeped me out.
So that's as far as we've gotten. Like that's as far as we've investigated Hellier.
I've often thought that it meant more. It was more about the town, and that like David was one person who's experiencing it, and maybe he left, and our chances of getting into David's cave and you know are over. But it doesn't matter because we know this caving system exists all around that area and all up and down through Kentucky and pretty much halfway across the country. That's one instance of potentially, I don't know, thousands of them. So for me, I've often thought that it was more like kind of egging us on. Like you need to go back. You have to go back and start asking questions. So, I mean, obviously we have to go. There's no way around it. We have to go.
We weren't really the picture of professionalism, especially for an honest case. So I thought, okay, either this guy's got the wrong email address, or it's just somebody screwing around. So I just kind of wrote like an email back, and I was like, I think I kind of jokingly said, I'm sorry, but I don't really have any expertise in alien monster cases. But if you want to fill me in on more details, I'd love to hear it. And I thought, oh, never hear that again. Or one of my friends will be like, I did it. It was funny. And it wasn't too much later that a longer, like 3-page email arrived.
For the past 6 months, I have been living in a rural home located on the border of West Virginia and Kentucky, where my family is nightly assaulted by creatures that I have come to believe are of an extraterrestrial origin. These beings appear to be the size and stature of a small child, devoid of any facial features save for large, oily eyes and lipless mouths. They frighten my children by peering through their bedroom windows, chirping at one another. They actively attempt to enter my home in the middle of the night. Last month they took my dog. I believe that they are coming from an abandoned mine located on the edge of my property. Though I am armed, I'm afraid that I'm far too frightened to enter the mine by my lonesome, and cannot convince any sympathetic friends to accompany me, though I cannot blame them. I was given your contact information through a man by the name of Terry Wrist. When these disturbances first began occurring, I was only inclined to confide in a personal friend who I knew had fringe interests. He offered to share my concerns with a man that had dealt with somewhat similar experiences in previous years. I accepted his offer. Within a week, I was informed that this gentleman had long since retired from pursuits of this kind, but was willing to provide me with contacts who may be willing to help. This is how I came to contact you. I do not have any answer to why, other than a referral and a recommendation from a gentleman I do not know personally. I was under the impression that you would answer that question. Most of Pike County is made up of small towns and rural communities. It is not uncommon to go days without seeing my closest neighbors. I moved to this area for the peace and quiet. I have received neither. I have lived in this area for just under 7 months, and in that time the majority of the harassment has occurred within the past 3. I did not become aware of any strangeness until early December, although that is only when I began to keep a record of these events. At first it was merely strange tracks in the snow around my home. I had initially imagined that they were some kind of animal, though it closely resembled a human footprint minus the heel. At that time, I was under the impression that it was simply a single creature. It wasn't until weeks later that I began to suspect that I was dealing with a number of what I thought were individuals hazing me upon my arrival to the area. In the weeks leading up to this particular evening, I had awoken to find my shed doors open on several occasions, many of my children's toys missing or moved, and my yard in general disarray. The second week of January, I'm having breakfast with my family when my 5-year-old daughter begins talking about kids without hair. When my wife inquired about these kids, she informed us that she had spent the previous night watching them play in the yard. As you can imagine, this was some concern. I asked my daughter what these kids looked like. She told me that they were bald like Grandpa and weren't wearing any clothes. The very same day I found the wreath that hangs inside our rear porch stuffed into our mailbox. I purchased and installed motion-activated floodlights the following day, and for a time the problem ceased. It wasn't until the end of February that our daughter informed us that the bald kids had returned. I was awoken to the sound of my daughter screaming, rushed to her bedroom only to meet her halfway down the hall. When my wife and I were finally able to calm her down enough to speak, she told us that the kids were trying to peer into her window, but they couldn't reach and instead had taken to tapping on it. She hasn't slept in her own bedroom since. Almost every day for the following week, I would find some evidence that something or someone had been on my property the previous night. On Wednesday, the 7th of March, I finally witnessed the kids without hair for myself. The dog woke me up around 1:30 a.m., scratching at the back door and whimpering to be let out. I noticed that the motion floodlight was on and went to the kitchen window to check that the shed doors were still closed when I realized I could see the shadow of an individual cast across my lawn. From the angle I was positioned at the window, I could not actually see the source of the shadow or the floodlights. The dog was pacing circles around the back door, and I could hear someone rifling through a box on the porch. Filled with a little more anger than common sense, the only reaction I could muster was to bang loudly on the window and yell, at which point I heard the screen door on the porch swing open and slam against the house. I heard what I can only describe as chirping. At this point, it sounded much like a skunk, if more guttural. I then realized that there were more than 2 people on my property, and the shadow, which had been reacting as if it didn't know which way to run, was quickly joined by another. For a moment I watched as the shadows chirped at one another when I noticed a figure out of the corner of my eye. Standing in the flower bed just to the bottom left of my window was a small, humanoid figure with silky pale skin, completely hairless, standing roughly 4 feet. It was looking in the direction of the shadows and had clearly come from around the left side of the house opposite the porch and had not noticed me as far as I could tell. Its face was devoid of features, save for large round eyes, very reminiscent in shape and color of a bird's eye. It had no nose to speak of, and only a small slit for a mouth. It didn't appear to move its mouth as it chirped, sounding more as if noises originated from its throat. It was most certainly not a wild animal, and even more certainly not a child. I was too terrified to move, and watched as the creature hopped to the others, and together they scrambled into the woods on the right side of my property. It was clear that there was at least 5 in the group. I have not mentioned this particular incident to my wife. The only other person who I have spoken to about these creatures are yourself and the close friend who introduced me to our mutual friend, Mr. Wrist.
At that point, I said, we'd love to come and check it out, but we need some kind of proof. We need some kind of evidence that there's something actually going on here. You're not just pulling our leg. And would you let us film this if we came out and did it? And the guy said, nah, it's totally fine. I just want complete anonymity because I'm a doctor and it would hurt my reputation if any of this stuff got out.
So my initial response to all of it was, I was suspicious. And I was kind of like, yeah, okay. Like, he would read me the emails and I'd be like, okay, Goblins, sure. And then for me, the first time that I actually stopped and went like, okay, this is legitimately strange, was when we got the pictures.
At first I was like, holy shit, these are crazy. These are nuts. I've never seen anything like it. But I'm not an outdoorsy person. I don't know a ton of animal tracks. So I sent it to every like outdoorsy person. I think actually I posted it to Facebook first and was like, look at this weird stuff that we're getting. You know, what in the world are these? And a lot of people chimed in saying, you know, maybe it's an emu, but that's really strange. I don't know why there would be an emu at this place, and you know, their pacing isn't proper. But a lot of the Bigfoot hunters that I know started to go, what's really interesting about this is these all look like they have dermal ridges. And dermal ridges are basically like fingerprints for feet and hands. They're like the crease lines in the feet. And they're extremely hard to fake. So whatever was leaving these actually had some creases in the foot, these dermal ridges. So it was a fleshy footprint, which means it wouldn't have been an emu, because I think they have like talons. And they looked just kind of like fat fingers, like 3 fat fingers. After that point, I was like, okay, maybe there is something really strange going on here.
The emails were weirdly written, like they felt almost like it's strange going back and rereading them, because for me, when I do read them, they almost feel a little like there's something completely off about whoever's writing it. Like it almost, for me, felt like someone trying to get us to go somewhere, and that was like setting off alarms. So yeah, when we did get the pictures, I didn't lose that kind of fear that was like innately kind of already there, but then I was curious.
So I sent him another email. I said, yeah, okay, you got my attention. We're into this. How do you want to go about this? Because I was in Canada at the time. You know, going to Kentucky wasn't an easy trip for me. I wasn't even allowed to leave the country while I was going through immigration. So I told him, we're definitely interested in doing this. You know, are you still going to be there? Are you going to be able to take pictures of more stuff? You know, I need something that shows how big the footprints are, because you can't really tell how big they are. And I think it was like 2 or 3 months later, he emails back and says, I had to flee the house. I'm sorry, I haven't been in touch. I had to move my family out. Things just got too crazy. We just don't feel safe here. And he said, I'm going to be going back to the house. I will take more photographs, and if I can find anything else, and I'll do my best to show you how big everything is. I'll be there for like 3 or 4 nights, and I'm going back to collect all of our stuff. I think it was with his brother-in-law. And sure enough, a couple days later, another series of photos come in. And they're the same type of footprint. They look like they were taken somewhere else, but they had a measuring stick next to it. And it showed that they were like half the size of a regular human footprint. So they were tiny and they were kind of round. Like they didn't look like they had any kind of heel on them. And also attached were a series of really dark photographs that he claimed were of the creatures themselves that he had taken from his back porch. Like it doesn't, yeah, like it's nothing. Like one of them we just kind of threw out immediately because you can't really see anything. It almost looks like a big round thing with 2 big black eyes, possibly. But the other ones were a little more interesting. That one looks like a fucking gray alien. One of them looked like the side profile of a typical extraterrestrial gray. You can see shoulder, eye cheekbones. That one to me, again, it could be anything, but that's like a profile shot of an extraterrestrial. That's what that looks like. And then the other one looked like something was leaning around a tree. And it was really hard to kind of make out what size it was, but you could see that whatever it was had a completely bald head, wasn't wearing any kind of clothes to speak of. It was kind of a weird, whitish, yellowish color. You could see what looks like a shoulder, like a hand reaching out. I know. Which was an interesting detail of the original Hopkinsville case, is they glowed. I was like, I'm in. We're going. We're going to go check this thing out. We're going to put everything on hold. This is crazy.